The name Joseph Stalin evokes a chill, a shudder down the spine. His legacy is one of fear, oppression, and unimaginable suffering. His reign over the Soviet Union from the 1920s to his death in 1953 remains a dark chapter in human history. During these decades, Stalin transformed the Soviet Union into a totalitarian state, where dissent was crushed and loyalty was demanded at all costs. Stalin's rule was marked by terror, his policies responsible for the deaths of millions. The Great Purge, the forced collectivization, and the establishment of the Gulag system are just a few examples of his brutal methods. Through forced collectivization, ruthless purges, and the establishment of a vast system of labor camps, Stalin's regime cast a long shadow of fear and suffering across the Soviet Union. The agricultural policies led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, where millions starved to death.
My rise to power was marked by cunning and ruthlessness. I maneuvered through the political landscape with a calculated precision, eliminating anyone who stood in my way. I consolidated my authority by eliminating rivals and crushing dissent. The secret police, the NKVD, were my instruments of terror, ensuring that no one could challenge my rule. My paranoia knew no bounds, leading to an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that permeated Soviet society. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and families were torn apart by the constant threat of arrest and execution.
This climate of terror would have devastating consequences for millions of innocent people. The purges decimated the intellectual and military elite, leaving the country weakened and vulnerable. The scale of human suffering under Stalin's regime is difficult to comprehend. Entire populations were displaced and countless lives were destroyed by the relentless machinery of the state. From the fertile plains of Ukraine to the frozen wastelands of Siberia, millions perished from starvation, disease, and overwork. The human cost of Stalin's policies is a tragic testament to the dangers of absolute power. The stories of those who survived bear witness to the horrors of this era, a stark reminder of the fragility of human life and the dangers of unchecked power. Their testimonies are a crucial part of our understanding of this dark period. It is our duty to remember these atrocities, to learn from the past, and to ensure that such horrors never happen again. By preserving the memory of the victims, we honor their suffering and reaffirm our commitment to justice and human rights. By shining a light on the darkest corners of history, we honor the victims and reaffirm our commitment to a future where human rights and dignity are paramount. Education and remembrance are our tools to prevent the repetition of such tragedies, ensuring that future generations understand the importance of vigilance against tyranny. The Ukrainian Holodomor, a man-made famine engineered by Stalin's regime from 1932 to 1933, stands as a chilling testament to the brutality of totalitarian rule. This catastrophic event was not merely a result of poor governance or natural disaster. It was a calculated and deliberate act of oppression, driven by a desire to eliminate Ukrainian nationalism and force collectivized farming. Stalin's policies transformed a breadbasket of Europe into a land of starvation and death. The fertile fields that once fed millions were stripped bare, their bounty seized to meet Soviet quotas. The Soviet government's ruthless grain confiscations left Ukrainian peasants with nothing to eat. Entire communities were left to starve as grain was forcibly taken from their homes and farms, often at gunpoint.
Families were torn apart as millions succumbed to starvation. The death toll was staggering, with estimates ranging from 3 to 7 million people. The impact on the social fabric of Ukraine was profound, as entire generations were lost. Desperate mothers watched their children wither away, their cries for food met with silence. The sight of emaciated children, their bodies reduced to skin and bones, became a haunting symbol of the Holodomor's cruelty. The once vibrant villages of Ukraine became ghost towns, haunted by the specters of famine. Homes were abandoned, streets were empty, and the silence was broken only by the whispers of those who had survived.
The Holodomor was not simply a tragic consequence of misguided policies, it was a deliberate act of genocide. Stalin's regime sought to break the will of the Ukrainian people, to crush their spirit and erase their identity. Stalin's regime aimed to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people, to crush their resistance to Soviet collectivization. The forced collectivization policies were met with resistance, but the brutal response from the Soviet government was swift and merciless. The Ukrainian identity, rooted in their fertile land and rich culture, was targeted for elimination. The Soviet regime sought to erase the cultural and historical heritage of Ukraine, replacing it with a homogenized Soviet identity. The Holodomor serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of ideological fanaticism and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. The policies that led to the famine were driven by a ruthless desire for control and domination. The suffering endured by the Ukrainian people during this dark period stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Despite the horrors they faced, the Ukrainian people have persevered, and their story continues to be a powerful reminder of the need to stand against tyranny and oppression. The vast expanse of Siberia, with its frozen wastelands and unforgiving climate, became synonymous with suffering and despair under Stalin's rule. The icy winds and endless snowfields were not just natural barriers, but also symbols of the isolation and desolation faced by those who were sent there. Millions of innocent souls were deported to the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps scattered across the Soviet Union. These trains, packed beyond capacity, carried men, women, and even children to their grim fates. The journey itself was a harrowing ordeal, with many not surviving the trip. These camps, monuments to human cruelty, became the final resting place for countless individuals deemed enemies of the state. The mass graves and abandoned barracks stand as silent witnesses to the atrocities committed. Memorials now dot the landscape, a somber reminder of the lives lost and the suffering endured.
The Gulag system was designed to break the spirit and exploit the labor of those deemed a threat to Stalin's regime. Propaganda painted these camps as places of reform, but in reality, they were centers of relentless exploitation and dehumanization. Political prisoners, intellectuals, artists, and ordinary citizens accused of minor infractions were rounded up and sent to these remote camps. Their only crime was often a mere suspicion or a word spoken out of turn. The intellectual and cultural fabric of the nation was torn apart as its brightest minds were silenced. Stripped of our humanity, we endured unimaginable hardships. The daily grind of back-breaking labor, coupled with starvation and disease, reduced us to mere shadows of our former selves. The constant fear of punishment loomed over us, making every moment a struggle for survival.
Survivors of the Gulag, their voices trembling with the weight of memory, tell harrowing tales of starvation, disease, and brutality. Their haunted expressions reveal the deep scars left by their experiences. These stories are not just personal accounts, but also crucial historical testimonies that shed light on the dark chapters of human history. They speak of back-breaking labor in freezing temperatures, of meager rations that barely sustained life, and of the constant threat of violence from guards. The harsh winters added another layer of suffering, with many succumbing to the cold and exhaustion. Through their testimonies, we catch a glimpse of the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find hope even in the darkest of places. Despite the overwhelming odds, prisoners found ways to support each other, sharing what little they had and keeping the flame of hope alive. The Gulag, a symbol of totalitarian oppression, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of freedom and the importance of safeguarding human rights against all forms of tyranny. The barbed wire fences and watchtowers are not just relics of the past, but also warnings for the future, urging us to remain vigilant and protect the freedoms we hold dear. The Great Terror, a period of intense paranoia and mass repression that swept through the Soviet Union from 1936 to 1938, stands as a chilling testament to the destructive power of unchecked political power. Fueled by Stalin's own paranoia and his desire to eliminate any perceived threats to his authority, the Great Terror left an indelible scar on Soviet society.
Millions of innocent people, from high-ranking party officials to ordinary citizens, fell victim to the purges. Accusations of treason, espionage and sabotage were enough to seal their fate. The NKVD operated with impunity, rounding up suspects in the dead of night and subjecting them to brutal interrogations.
Show trials, carefully staged events designed to instill fear and obedience, became commonplace. Confessions, extracted through torture and coercion, were broadcast to the nation, further solidifying Stalin's grip on power. The very fabric of Soviet society unraveled as fear and suspicion poisoned relationships, turning neighbors against neighbors and even family members against one another. The Great Terror left an indelible mark on the Soviet psyche. The trauma of this period, characterized by arbitrary arrests, disappearances, and executions, would cast a long shadow over the lives of survivors and their families for generations to come.